This podcast is part of the Spoon Podcast Network, home of smart conversations that feed your mind.
Well, hey, everybody, and welcome to yet another episode of Watch What You Eat with Carolyn O'Neill. I am Carolyn O'Neill, and here on this podcast, we're seeking the very best in food, nutrition, and cuisine, and all topics in the food world, from pate to pesticides. We're really exploring the silly and the serious. A lot of serious, but we can have fun with every single topic. And we are part of the Spoon Podcast Network. We're focused on the future. We're focused on what's best for everybody. And we like to watch what's happening. What are the trends? What's trending? Why? And maybe why not? We want to tell you what to watch out for to protect your body and your budget. And we like to watch. We like to watch beautiful foods come together and share with you some of those secrets of the stove and beyond. And today's guest, I'm very excited about because Allison Carol Duffy is an expert on home food preservation. Now, you've all heard of canning, you've heard of freezing, you've probably heard of drying foods. Really a skill, an art, a craft that's as old as the hills. But you know what? Perfect for modern times. Allison, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me on, Carolyn. I really appreciate it.
All right, well, let's get into that. So what's old is new again. What are you finding out as really appealing about really the ancient craft of home food preservation?
Yeah, so I really feel like people are becoming, as you said, it's coming back again, and people are becoming increasingly interested of all ages, people of all different ages, in learning to preserve their own food. It's a way to be more self-sufficient. It's a way to eat locally. It can be economical. It's just, I think there's a lot of, at this time, it's just the perfect time for people to start doing more of that. And we're really seeing an uptick.
Well, a little bit more about Allison. She is a master food preserver. She knows what she's talking about. And that's through the University of Maine Cooperative Extension Program. And she has a master's degree in gastronomy from Boston University. I'm a registered dietitian. I got my master's in nutrition at Boston University. So, wow, I love that our university there in Boston is combining food, nutrition, and cuisine, all the good stuff. We find that intersection. But back to cooperative extension, again, speaking about what's old is new again, I mean, USDA Cooperative Extension has been there for people who have home gardens, certainly in home shopping, teaching people everything about the basics and gardening, master gardeners. Of course, some of you listening may in fact be a master gardener, but you're a master food preserver. What's entailed in that?
So it's a program that's about, it takes place, they run it yearly, and it takes place from sort of May through the mid-fall, and it's I think it's about 40 hours total-ish. Don't quote me on that, but it's about that. And you hands-on learning all throughout the growing season. I'm in Maine, so throughout Maine growing season, and you learn all the different techniques for preserving, not all, but many, I should say. And it's just a really great opportunity to get really in depth in terms of increasing preservation knowledge. And then an important part of the program is that after you complete the program, you're then a Master Food Preserver volunteer. So Master Food Preservers give back volunteer hours every year as well.
So I know you do a lot of teaching in that regard. So now we're here to learn from you, from Allison Carol Duffy, our master food preserver on Watch What You Eat with Carolyn O'Neill. Let's get started. If you can, get started with the home canning.
I can do that.
So what are the basics? And just kind of like canning 101. We are ready.
Okay. So basically, at its most basic, canning is the process of putting food in jars, heating the jars up to a temperature hot enough and for a time long enough to kill microorganisms of concern. And then upon sealing, as the jar cools, a vacuum seal will occur, and then that will keep out any other potential bacteria and air. And then it's preserved until you are ready to eat it. What's important to know is that there are two types of canning. There's boiling water bath canning and there is pressure canning. And which type you use is not a choice. It is dependent on what you are canning. So high acid foods may be canned in a boiling water bath canner, while low acid foods must be canned in a pressure canner. So a low acid food, or I should say a high acid food, is basically most fruits, jams and jellies are high acid foods, as well as foods that have had additional vinegar or lemon juice added. So they have become more acidic through the addition of that. So an example of that might be, say, like salsa or dilly beans. Those are foods where, green beans by themselves are low acid, but you have added vinegar, so it makes it a high acid product.
So the recipe itself would then become high acid because you're adding vinegar. And you said dilly beans. I think you just used that very quickly in a sentence. So explain to people, a dilly bean is?
So a dilly bean is the same idea as like what we think of as pickles. A cucumber pickle is just, it's done with green beans instead of cucumbers, which is what we more commonly think of as pickles.
Okay. Now, as a dietitian, of course, I study food safety. And, before we get into the how-tos, I just really want to underscore the significance of getting excited about home canning, but getting more excited about doing it the right way and following directions. Allison, tell us why that's so important.
Yes, it is. It's really important, especially with canning, to make sure that you are using a tested recipe and following the directions. And the reason is because of the high acid, low acid distinction. So as I was mentioning before, high acid foods may be canned in a boiling water canner, but low acid foods, which are all vegetables, meats, dairy, those all have to be canned in a pressure canner unless they have additional acid added, because to make sure that any of the potentially concerning bacteria are killed. Pressure canners can reach a much higher temperature than a boiling water bath canner can. Pressure canners can reach 240 degrees, and that's the temperature that's needed to kill microorganisms of concern, such as the botulism spores that could exist in a low acid product.
And a pressure canner is not the same as a pressure cooker?
Correct. So sometimes people confuse that, and it's a really important point to make, that they are not the same thing. So you want to make sure you have a pressure canner. It is a very specific piece of equipment that has a locking lid. It has a pressure gauge, or it has a weighted gauge, and it's got a steam release valve. It's very specific.
And we'll add some photos of that, some images of that into our video version, which of course will be on YouTube, and a picture's worth 1,000 words. And folks, you could be taking notes and of course listening to Allison, but on our info sheet on the podcast, we have all kinds of resources for you. This is to get you excited about it and want to learn more. And we've got so much to talk about. You showed a chart when I saw one of your presentations, Allison, of the low acid and the high acid. It's a spectrum.
It is, yes.
So are some in the middle? And I'm just wondered.
Yes. So, for example, tomatoes are a perfect example of something that's kind of close to the borderline. So the borderline is 4.6. So as I said earlier, anything with a pH of less than 4.6 is high acid. Anything greater than 4.6 is low acid. So tomatoes, because there are so many different varieties of tomatoes, their acid levels vary slightly. And because of that, and because they're close to the line, it's now recommended that you add either lemon juice or citric acid to your tomatoes when you're canning them. So that is the way that some of those close to the border fruits and vegetables are dealt with.
Okay. All right. Well, that makes sense. So, because are you measuring the pH at home? Is that
no? So thank you for asking that question. So that is where the tested recipe comes in. So you do not need to, and frankly shouldn't, because you want to make sure that, at home, what we could do pH wise at home is not reliable enough, compared to what you can do in a lab professionally. So the best way to make sure that you are canning a safe product is to use a tested recipe from a reliable source. And those recipes will all be scientifically tested for having the correct pH, making sure the density is correct, so that you know that you are, and it's going to tell you what method of canning to use, and for how long to can it, and for how much headspace to leave in the jar. So you follow the directions on a tested recipe and you know you're good to go. You've got a safe product.
Wow. Okay, then we can't. All right, so let's get to the jar. I happen to find I have a whole bunch of these ball jars. Yeah. I think I mostly use them to serve cocktails in the summer, but maybe to catch fireflies. That's really popular too.
Definitely.
Tell us about this and what's important about all of its moving parts. The ball jar that's clear with the metal lid.
Yes. So that is standard canning jar. That's exactly what you want to use. So that particular one that you have, looks like it's a quart size. I think you had a quart size there, no, sorry, a pint. Sorry, that's a pint you've got.
It's got milliliters on here too.
Yeah, you have a pint jar there. So those come in, they come in, half pint sizes, pint sizes, quart sizes, up to half gallon sizes. And that is absolutely what you want to use when you are canning, because that is what is the gold standard for canning today. In the old days, people use different styles of jars, and those are no longer considered safe for canning. And the reason is that they don't create a vacuum seal. Like when you think about the old jars that have the glass lids, that can't create a vacuum seal. So so the kind of jars you want to use are what you were showing there. But the parts of the jar, you've got your jar itself, and then you have the two-piece lid. So you have the dome lid, which is the flat piece of metal. And then, yes,
you've got this
the flat piece of metal, exactly. And then you have the screw band, which is the ring that goes around and holds that on top. And that is, yep, exactly, just like that. So after you processing is when you are actually heating the food in the canner. So after you process your jar, that little flat lid is going to suck down and create a vacuum seal. And you'll know that it's sealed because if you look now on your lid, there's a little button.
Yeah.
Do you see that? Do you see how that moves?
And wait.
Yes, exactly.
And for those of you who are just listening and not seeing, you hear that? Yeah. So what happens after it's processed? Right.
So after it's processed, so what's really kind of wild is that while it's processing, even though the lid is screwed on, it's not screwed on very tight. So it's actually it's not sealed yet. It's definitely not tight yet. But once you take it out of the canner and it cools, then the air is going to create a vacuum seal because of the temperature change and the pressure change. And then the lid will be essentially suctioned on to the jar. And when that happens, that little button that you were just moving gets sucked down. So if you were to touch that button after the jar had been processed, after it had cooled, that button shouldn't move. So if there's any movement, that tells you that your jar is not sealed. And that's how you know your jar is sealed, is there's no movement there and the lid stays on. And so after you're done processing, after your jars have cooled, you actually take the screw band off. And you don't store it with the screw band on because it's no longer doing anything. So you actually store it just with the lid. And that's because you want to make sure that there's no food on the outside of the jar collecting under the band. It's just a cleaner way to do it.
Wow, this is a lot. And, and I think we actually may have skipped a step, which is sterilizing, kind of kill the germs that might be on this jar that, of course, was in my basement. Right. Okay.
Oh, yes. Yes, we definitely skipped a few steps. So back at the beginning, before you can anything, you want to make sure that you're working with clean jars. So even if they're brand new from the store, you still should wash them. So wash the jar, wash the lid, wash the bands. And then before you can, you want to, technically speaking, you don't have to sterilize if you're processing it for longer than 10 minutes. I always tend to because it's not difficult to do. But if you are processing for less than 10 minutes, what you want to do is you want to make sure that if you're using a boiling water bath canner, you want to have it basically have the jars in the water at a rolling boil for 10 minutes if you're at sea level. So the reality is most of the time, as I said, I sterilize anyway, because you've got the canner going. It's easy to do.
Okay, well, so we've got a sterilized jar. Do we have to make sure that the foods that we're canning are clean as well? I mean, obviously you're not going to put in an unwashed peach, but
right.
How rigorous do you need to be?
Well, you want to make sure that it's as clean as you can. And then there are raw pack canning recipes that put where you have a raw food, but many are already cooked. At least heated. So that takes care of some of the concern, but mostly you just want to focus on making sure your produce is very, very clean.
Okay. So, does it matter if you're combining things? Like, let's say I want tomatoes that I'm going to can with some green bell peppers together. Does that change the recipe?
So yes. And in fact, I know this is really tough for particularly people who really like to cook and maybe are experimental cooks. It's difficult to get used to the idea, but with canning, you can't just make up a recipe like that for safety reasons. So goes back to the low acid, high acid thing that I mentioned earlier. So you need to know, green beans. You said peppers? That's right. So peppers are low acid. Any vegetable is low acid, or most vegetables. So So you can't just put however many peppers you want in, because you're then not going to know how that's going to impact the pH. So if you think that you want to make something that has tomatoes and peppers, you want to look for a recipe that includes tomatoes and peppers. And there are a lot of great tested recipes out there that you can use that's going to hopefully come close. But I will say, if you're really set on your own recipe, which I totally get that, then the option is just freeze it instead of trying to can it. Just put it in the freezer, because you can do whatever you want in the freezer. So
Yeah, we applaud your creativity,
Right.
but which brings me to this question, which I've asked you before, but I love this response.
Yeah.
I go, hey, Allison, so when somebody gifts you some beautiful home
Mhm.
canned products that they made, family
Yes.
or friends,
Ah,
what do you think?
oh,
Hey,
it's a tough
Allison
one.
just gave you these
I know.
canned
It's a
green beans.
it's a tough one, because of course I feel bad, but I have, if it's someone I know has,
Can you spot a problem? Would you be able to spot a problem?
no, that's the thing is,
No.
I mean, there are problems you can spot. Certainly there are jars that you can see spoilage, but unfortunately botulism is not something that you can see. It doesn't smell, you can't taste it, and you can't see it. So that's why it's as dangerous as it is. So if it's someone that I, trust their canning abilities, of course I would eat it. But I would say, if I wasn't sure, I do have to say I would sadly pass.
Okay,
Just
if they've attended your master food preserver classes and got
yes,
a good grade, okay,
that's
yes,
right.
I will try it,
I'll
but
try it.
not like,
Yeah,
"Hi, I made this in the school
right,
science fair."
right,
Okay.
exactly, exactly.
So, let's get back to, when you think of the beautiful images of canned seasonal foods, like in a pantry, I mean, the gorgeous peaches and the tomatoes, and it's just so lovely, isn't it, just
It's
to look at
beautiful.
that? And,
Yes.
you know, you're kind of preserving nature, like the bounty of the summer.
Mhm.
You're in Maine. I happen to be in Atlanta. We have different
We
seasons.
do.
But what would you say to get people excited about the beauty? And, we say we like to watch. What is so beautiful about having those cans at home that you have put up yourself?
Oh, it is such a feeling of, I mean, they're physically beautiful, first of all, I think anyway. But the feeling of having made it yourself. So it's like, making art, making crafts, you've made it, so it feels great for that reason. It also feels great because you have so much more self-reliance and self-sufficiency having food that what you've put into it, what ingredients are in it, that it's healthy, that it's safe. It's really empowering to have that in your pantry. To me, that's beautiful.
And,
Definitely.
speaking of craft, Allison's website is Canning Craft. That's C as in canning, C as in
Yes.
craft.com, canningcraft.com. And of course, there's lots of great information there. It makes me think about the supermarket. And of course, we have a lot of things in jars. I mean, maybe I think of like beets, sometimes they're in jars, or the little onions are in jars. But most stuff is in the metal cans, right?
Yes.
Commercially.
Yes. Yes. That is true. A lot of it is.
You can't see what's in there.
No, you can't. And
I mean,
I like the jars.
yeah, I trust the major brands, but
Yeah.
still, it is
Yeah.
funny when you think about it.
It is. It's very true.
And I understand that the technology may have been invented by Napoleon in Napoleon times.
Yes, that's what I understand. Yep. I know. Pretty interesting.
Canning food to
Yep.
keep his armies fed.
Yes, exactly.
All right, so let's think about it. Where we've processed it, and again, different times, right,
Yep.
for the different foods.
Correct.
And I know that there are different pieces of equipment, and we're going to, throw up an image of that and edit it in. But a jar lifter.
Yes.
And what else besides the
Okay.
jar lifter do we
Yeah.
need? And let's get
So-
into to some personal safety.
Yes, exactly. So you need either in terms of equipment, you need your jars, which we've already talked about. You need either a boiling water bath canner or a pressure canner, depending on what you are canning. And then the smaller tools that you need, a jar lifter, as you mentioned, which is what you use to lift the jars in and out of the canner. And it's a specialized piece of equipment. There is nothing, it's specifically for lifting jars, and it's very handy. It's pretty hard to can without it.
Using tongs is really not reliable.
It's not, it's just hard to hold them. It's like that, they drop, and yeah, a jar lifter is really worth it. They're not expensive. They're definitely worth it. So jar lifter is very useful. You'll need a ladle to ladle your food into the jar. You're going to want a wide mouth funnel that fits the opening of the jar. And because it's very messy if you don't use one of those. So, and then another tool that is very helpful is what's called a headspace tool and a bubble freer. And you can buy a tool that actually has a headspace tool on one end and a bubble freer tool on the other end, which is very convenient to measure headspace and to free the bubbles. You could certainly get away with using a clean ruler and a clean chopstick to do the same thing, but it is nonetheless a convenient tool.
Well, let's talk about headspace. Why is that important?
Okay, so headspace,
lack of, I guess.
Yeah, right. So headspace is the distance between the top of the food. So once you put the food in the jar, it's the distance between the top of the food and the bottom of the lid. And I mean the bottom of the lid inside the jar, not on the outside. So, and typically it's usually it's a quarter of an inch to a half inch, depending on what you're canning. Some things have more, but quarter to half inch is very common. And jams and jellies tend to be quarter inch, but other things tend to be half inch. So you want to measure the headspace with that tool, and it's important because during the processing time, the air that's in that headspace is getting forced out of the jar. And then when you take the jar, and so it gets forced out of the jar because if I mentioned earlier, your lid is not screwed on real tight yet at this point. In fact, it's not screwed on tight at all. So air can actually escape from underneath the lid. And you want that to happen during processing. That's what happens while it's in the canner. Then when you take it out, that the lid will seal as the vacuum seal will be created. If you have the wrong headspace, the proper amount of air isn't going to be forced out of there. So for example, if you left half a jar open, and you processed at the time that the recipe said, you will not have gotten all of that air out of that headspace. That's why headspace is important.
Wow, this really gives me an even greater respect for the Canned Food Alliance, which of course is the organization that to represent health and nutrition and economy. I really respect that this is something that really needs to be done perfectly, but we can do it at home. Yes, you can.
Absolutely.
Yes, you can. But if you don't want to, you can freeze. Okay. So Allison, let's talk about the magic of freezing. But again, some rules there too. So you have, I guess, a successful product that tastes good.
Exactly. So the big difference, well, many differences, but one difference between canning and freezing is that the guidelines with freezing are not about safety. They are about quality of product. So that's why, as I said earlier, if you have, your specialty soup that you want to preserve, just freeze it. That's a great way to deal with that. So in terms of guidelines for freezing, fruits freeze really, really well, and they take not much work at all. So if you go strawberry picking during strawberry season and you want to have a lot for future, which is something that I love to have. I love to have,
or even if they're on sale at the supermarket, right?
Absolutely. If they're on sale at the grocery store, if you can stock up, that's a great way to do it. So then you can, you want to just cut the stems off, prepare the fruit in any way that makes sense, depending on what you're canning. And some fruits some fruits you can consider treating with ascorbic acid or lemon juice just to stop the browning. You know how say you cut peaches and they get a little brown. That will just make them a little more aesthetically pleasing. Not a safety thing, just if you want to. But so basically with fruit, you can either just pack it right in your freezer safe container, or you can pack it in a freezer safe container with some kind of liquid like a sugar syrup. A lot of people do it that way. That creates a nice, really nicely textured product. Or another way to do it, which is my personal favorite, is I like to do what's called tray pack. So I put my berries on a baking sheet and freeze it on the baking sheet. And the reason for that is then once they're frozen, then you transfer it into your freezer safe container, and the berries don't get smushed that way. And you can remove one berry at a time or 5 berries at a time. You don't have to defrost the entire container because they're not frozen together. So that's how you do fruit. Vegetables.
I have a question before we move on. There's so many things right now about boozy desserts.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when you add alcohol. I'm just,
Yeah.
just saying. Okay,
Yes.
so let's say we've got some beautiful strawberries and I'm thinking, or maybe some other fruit, and I'm thinking I'm going to add some vodka
Yes.
to this. What happens?
Yes. So there absolutely nothing wrong with that. So
Does
part
it
of it's
change
not
the
going to
freezing
freeze as.
point at all?
So I
Or
think that it does. To be totally honest, I have not tried that exact thing.
I'm willing to
But
experiment with you,
yes, you
Allison.
should. But I would think that it would change how it freezes a little bit. But I don't see that would be an issue. But to be honest, I have not tried that one. So you should give that one a try.
Okay, research. And it was funny. I was thinking about people like myself who have a
Yes.
side-by-side freezer. I'm
Yes.
not getting a bacon sheet in there. I'm going to have to like get
Good
something
point.
skinnier. I got to get
Good
something
point.
skinnier to
Right.
put my little, because I do like the idea of the tray pack
Mhm.
freezing so that the berries don't. It's kind of like, you buy the chicken breasts that are individually
Yes.
quick frozen and they don't stick together. I like
Yes.
that idea. So you have more flexibility. Maybe you don't want the whole giant block of berries. You just
Correct.
want some for a smoothie, some
Mhm.
for the top of yogurt, or maybe some for a recipe you're making blueberry muffins. Oh
Exactly.
my gosh. So you could save the summer blueberries.
Yes.
And I think of you in Maine.
Yes.
Oh, I'm so jealous with the Maine blueberries,
Yes.
folks. It's a different critter than the high bush, I
It
guess we
is.
call them. They're tinier. They're more they're just more blueberry-y.
They are.
More
Agreed.
blueberry-y, but they have to be frozen, I understand, at the end of the season,
Yeah, well, you can can them as well, but yes,
Oh,
freezing
you
is
can can 'em.
You can, but freezing is great. I freeze mine when I have, that's how I preserve blueberries generally, because just, it's just really convenient, and as you said, you can take out a few at a time if you tray pack them.
Now, to help people avoid a problem, I know that with vegetables, blanching is key. Can you tell
Yes.
us why? I mean, what's going on with like a green bean? You can't just like throw it in the freezer.
Correct. I mean, you could. It's not going to hurt you, but its quality is not going to be as good. So basically, any food, so any vegetable, you're going to have enzymes that naturally create the spoilage of the food, and
So it kind of breaks down the
it kind of
cells,
breaks,
kind of a
exactly. It
thing.
just kind of
Oh, and
breaks
then,
down
so
the
is it
food.
a texture issue?
Correct. So it breaks. So that's like the normal process. So what blanching does is it stops the enzymes from working, and it doesn't I shouldn't say it entirely stops it. It slows the enzymes from working, so that then and then you freeze it so that the enzymatic action is not as significant as it would be if you just put it in the freezer not blanched. So that's why blanching is important, is it slows the enzymes down.
And you said often, and again, why I guess you don't want like a giant container or something to do the freezing quickly, right? Because
Yes.
you'll get a better product.
Exactly. So what happens with that is that when something is frozen, ice crystals are created in the cell walls. The faster you freeze it, the smaller the ice crystals are going to be. The slower you freeze it, the bigger the ice crystals are going to be. And the bigger the ice crystals, the more damage to the cell walls is going to occur. So you want less cell wall damage. So quicker freezing, smaller ice crystals.
And anybody who's ever made ice cream knows that, right?
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
really good quality ice cream is going to have tiny, tiny little
Yeah,
crystals as
exactly.
opposed to the ones like are reminiscent of freezer burn.
Right. Yeah. When you open up
We just have a few minutes left, but I got to make sure that we get to some dehydrating and
Oh,
some
perfect.
drying.
Yes.
So
that's
let's say we've canned, we've frozen, and now we're dehydrating. What are the best foods to do that with?
So you can do it with a lot of foods, but I particularly like to dehydrate fruits. So dehydrated apples are fantastic. Peaches, those are great. I've done tomatoes as well. You can also dehydrate vegetables, but you do, just like when you freeze them, you do need to blanch them first for the exact same reason. So I don't tend to choose vegetables unless I want lightweight food for like a backpacking trip. But the great place to start with dehydrating are fruits.
And one thing I know that you mentioned is that this is going to be at a very kind of 140 degrees Fahrenheit?
Yes, correct. Roughly 140.
Give us a little mini peek into, let's say we've got a bunch of apples.
Yep.
And then we want to dehydrate them. People are even doing that with strawberries too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect in my cocktails that we're going to
Right,
be
exactly.
experimenting with. So what do? You put it on like a sheet and then in
Yes.
the oven, or do you need
So
or a dehydrator, I guess?
So if you think that you might want to do this regularly, a dehydrator is a fantastic investment because it is definitely more convenient. So a dehydrator is essentially, a round or square piece of equipment with trays in it that has a blower and a fan and a heating element. So it essentially exposes what you're drying to a relatively low level of humidity and heat to dry it for the necessary time. But if you don't have one of those, you can use your oven. So if you just want to try it out and see if you like the idea of dehydrating, you can definitely use your oven. Set your oven at probably the lowest temperature you can set it, which hopefully will be around 140 degrees. And then you would slice up your fruit or whatever you're preserving and put it on a tray in the oven. And it'll take probably twice as long as a dehydrator. And then you want to crack the door a little bit to help with the airflow. But after many hours, you will have dehydrated apples, for example. Keep in mind how thickly you slice the pieces will impact how quickly it dries.
Well, that makes sense.
Yes.
Very much so.
Yes.
Well, we have so much more to talk about, and I
We
can't
do.
wait to have you back on because, folks, we haven't even talked about root cellars and
Right,
cold
exactly.
storage yet. It just is
There's so
amazing.
much.
And Allison, I just have to say, when we go off the grid, I
Yes.
totally want to be on your team. Okay.
Sounds great.
Because you're going to be eating well. And you know what, which makes me think about sustainability, which is so important, good for people and the planet. Probably one of the best ways. Of course, we want to grow delicious, nutritious foods, have great soil, great seeds, but learning how to store them properly and preserve them, I guess that really is nature's pause button. So that it is a skill which it will never go out of style.
Agreed. Totally agree. Yeah. I mean, it's just part of eating. It's part of food. I mean, it's inescapable. It really is.
And I just need your permission, if it's okay. I have a recipe for lazy pickles. When I get done with a jar of pickles, commercial pickles
Yes.
that I may love, I will just slice up cucumbers and put them in that brine. Is that okay?
Absolutely. And then in your refrigerator.
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah, in the
Absolutely.
refrigerator.
That is fantastic. Yes. That's a great way to do it. You wouldn't want to can it, but in your fridge is perfect. Perfect.
Okay, so folks, I'll add my recipe for lazy pickles, which you're going to keep in the refrigerator by using. Why would you throw away that beautiful brine
Agreed.
that came with the gorgeous pickles that somebody went to all the trouble of making? And you can extend it a little bit by adding some cucumbers and having a whole nother thing. Well, Allison, again, thank you so much. And of course, we can find you at canningcraft.com. Oh, and Allison has a book, Preserving with Pomona's Pectin. And that's terrific. I'll put that information on there too. And that's really talk about recipes is how to do, I guess, some canning of the fruits and jams and jellies with lower sugar and yet higher flavor.
Yes, for sure.
All
Yes.
right. Well, as a registered dietitian, I say this is a great way to enjoy more fruits and vegetables in so many different forms, a little bit of variety, not just in the kinds of fruits and vegetables you're consuming, but in their forms.
Exactly. Exactly.
So thanks, Allison.
Thank
Thanks
you so much, Carolyn. It's been
And
so
everyone,
fun.
thanks for listening in on Food Preservation with Allison Carol Duffy. And as always, you're always, always, always invited to add Watch What You Eat with Carolyn O'Neill to your podcast menu.